Hi, my name is Ray Konopka with Raize Software, and in this session I have the pleasure of introducing a new product from Raize Software called Radiant Shapes. Radiant Shapes is a library of 35 reusable native FMX FireMonkey shape controls. They're highly efficient, extremely flexible, and very easy to use. Everything you would expect from a Raize Software product. Radiant Shapes are useful in all facets of FMX UI design, from style composition to button adornment, all the way to data visualization and dashboard design. There's a Radiant Shape that will add added value to your user interfaces and designs. Radiant Shapes supports all of the FMX platforms. That includes Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android. There are also 30 custom component designers included with the product. If you're familiar with the Raize Components product by Raize Software, you're quite familiar with this. We've leveraged the same techniques and technology that was in Raize Components into our Radiant Shapes product to provide quick access to component customizations. Rather than have you hunt around the object inspector for the appropriate properties to make your changes, we give you direct access to those right at the component on your designer surface. And of course, there's the Raize Software attention to detail. This goes from everything from the design of the property names and the similar functionality, consistent behavior, even down to the icons in the component palette to easily recognize which shape and component you're using. So rather than talk more about Radiant Shapes in the slides, the best way is to actually dig in and let's take a look, see what it's all about. Here we have XE7 loaded with a multi-device application. Of course, it's built on the FMX framework. And of course, we also have our 35 Radiant Shapes visible in the component palette. The shapes themselves are pretty obvious from their icon. However, what I do want to spend a few minutes looking at is some of the finer details of the various controls and what we can customize with each of those and how we go about that customization. So to start, I'm going to just start with a simple line. There is a line component that's included into FMX. However, we provide our own because we provide other functionalities and features that go along with it. This also shows us a way to highlight some of the extra designer features, which I'm showing right now with being able to change the line slope from positive, negative, horizontal, and vertical, and then going back to whichever slope we want. However, one of the nice things with the line is the ability to have arrows on either end. So we can have it at the start end, the finish end, or if we can certainly have it at both ends, which is very nice. Likewise, we might want to change the arrow length. So if you wanted a large arrow, we can make it up to 30. We can even go very large and make it up to, say, 45 or 50. And of course, the designers give you some pre-canned values, but because this is FireMonkey and everything is floating point accessible, you can customize them using the object inspector with more fine-grained details if you so choose. In addition, there's some arrow widths, you can control the angles and so forth. But in addition to that, we also offer some of the standard property access points for like the alignment, and so all of our shape controls can be aligned, and in FMX there's a lot more alignment options than in the old VCL, and so this allows us to get access to those very quickly. So right now we have no alignment, but let's go ahead and align that to the client. And this next step is going to illustrate one of the attention to details that I talked about before. And we have a shape that has a sharp point on it. And when you have a stroke point of 1, it's not that big of an issue. However, when you go ahead and start changing your stroke, whether you keep it as solid or if we make it a larger, let's say we make it 10, one of the things that you'll find is that it's important to keep the bounds of your shape, including angled points, because they will extend outside of the normal bounds of your endpoints. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you end up getting clipping. And that's a problem that you have with the traditional path component. If you were to put an angled path in there and not accommodate any of the angles that are necessary, you'll get remnants whenever you move your control around. So let's take a look at what that means. If I go ahead and run this application, I've aligned my arrow to the client, and you can see that the points are stuck at the end there. If I go ahead and change the orientation of this, you can see that the arrow will always remain in view. It will not overshadow it and have the side of the arrow go outside of the bounds. And so there's dynamic repositioning of all of that as you go through and make the changes. And so this gives you a lot of flexibility for keeping things clean, especially when you're doing animation techniques that you know that the arrows and arrowheads are going to be completely in view. So let's take a look at some of the other controls that we offer. We have a rectangle and square. Square is always square. It maintains its perspective in the middle. It's actually very nice when you're trying to embed a square, say a record button or a stop button inside of a button adornment. Keeping it squared center makes it much easier. I do want to spend a few minutes talking about the frame and even the ring because they're very similar. And as you can tell, they have an area in the middle that is transparent. They're really a ring or a frame. One of the highlights that I wanted to emphasize on these controls is a radiant dimension is the type that we call it. And one of the things that we really strived for was to leverage the vector nature of FMX. Should you need that capability, we want to fully support that. And what that means is as I resize this control, I want the controls aspect and proportion to remain the same. And so that as I make it larger, that its details keep in the same perspective. Now, of course, we can turn that off and control that. And all of that is done by a radiant dimension. Now, in the frame class, it is the frame size property that controls it. And a radiant dimension has two elements to it. It either is a scale factor or it is an absolute pixel value. And so the first thing that we choose is, okay, are we doing it on scale factor? And if it is a scale factor, what is that scale factor relative to the whole? So right now the frame is 0.2 of the whole. If we decide to make that much larger, like 0.3, we'll see that our frame is much larger than it would be before. And if I make that smaller, it will still maintain that same aspect ratio. I can go back in and change the frame scale factor to 0.1, and it will adjust appropriately. If I wanted to do it absolute, I change the scale, the frame size to pixels, and then switch over and change it to absolute pixels. So the editor, the designer here, will change based on what value you have selected. So if we wanted to make it 30 pixels, then this is what that size will be. And as we resize it, it stays at 30 pixels. So you have a lot of flexibility and a very consistent way of manipulating the different shapes. So much so that when we go over to the ring size is another radiant dimension. And so it has the same capabilities in there. So your scale factor adjusts appropriately. We can make that 0.6 and so forth, back to 0.25 as well. The stretch option, normally the ring will stay in the center. If you want to stretch it, it will make it an elliptical and fill in the stretching there. So that's our radiant dimension, and you'll see several components that will leverage that. Anything that has an opening, a hole, or even a bar size. When you're controlling thicknesses, you want to be able to control both of those options. Next up, I wanted to talk about our angled controls. So we have, to start, we have our radiant sector, our pie piece, if you will. And for angles, we do things a little bit differently than the pie piece that's built into FMX. We took a little different approach because we wanted some more flexibility, and in being able to use them, we wanted to use the pie pieces much more easily when we work together. And that was one of the other design principles we had, is that these shapes often interact with each other, and we hardly ever use one by itself. So if you wanted to make a pie chart, for example, or some sort of gauge display, you'll want to be able to have these work in tandem. And so To that end, we use a start angle and a central angle for all of our angled controls. So the start angle simply tells us where it starts, and for FMX, the default 0° is the horizontal. So starting from the center and working out is your 0° line. Since we wanted to start up here, and we always go clockwise for your fill area, we started at 270, and then that goes all the way to 0 or 360, and of course you can wrap it around. If I want to change this to be starting out at 180, I can do that, and it goes up to my central angle, which is how much space this spans. So my central angle tells me, oh, I'm 90 degrees. Well, let's make that 135. And you can see how I can control this value here. Now, the nice thing with this, if I drop another one down, I can connect them because I know both the starting angle and the central angle, and it works very well. If I wanted to make this all the way, the central angle to be 270, I'm going to get 3/4 of a pi and adjust appropriately. What's also nice is all these things can be rotated with the standard FMX capabilities, so you still get that ability as well. In addition to the, I should go back to here, let me cancel that, go back to the ring here. Another property I mentioned here is use ring size. So here we can do the same thing as a ring, but it's sector based, so we don't have a full ring. And of course we can change the ring size again using a radiant dimension. We can adjust things appropriately, change our central angle to 120, and we can make the various changes. And of course this is going to scale as we change the size. The other angle control that we can use is this sector ring, which is similar to the ring from the outside, but it also has a sector area built. And there's a lot of flexibility that this can give us. For example, we can go ahead and change the central angle to, say, 180 and the start angle to 180 as well. And if you remember my ratings list control set topic from another session in this conference, I use a similar type shape for ratings, and you can do the same thing. You could switch this, we could fill these with different colors, but you can also have some more fun with this. We can change the central angle, say, to 240 and change the start angle to 150, and now we have, which looks to be more like a gauge, where we've got a little bit of a face plate here, and we have a background that still, of course, is transparent that we can fill with whatever we need. A lot of flexibility in setting up the various controls. Okay, continuing on, we have a number of triangles, diamonds and trapezoids and parallelograms and all kinds of things that we can control, give us again different user interface perspectives. One of the things our triangles give us, make this a little bit larger, easier to see, is we can change the direction, of course, so we can rotate them all around, up, top, right, and bottom, as you'd expect. We can also change the type of triangle to be a right triangle. And so from there we can change which corner. So if we want to make it in the top right, do the corner down into the bottom right, we have that ability. Of course, you can also go back to the isosceles. This gives us a lot of flexibility in using little drop downs or other indicators to suggest navigation for wizards and all kinds of things that we have a lot of flexibility, where a good triangle works well. And of course, as I mentioned before, if you decide to use a larger point size, the triangle will adjust itself so that it always remains in view, even though the sharp point will extend usually beyond what your component bounds are. We make sure that that doesn't happen. So you always have a crisp UI without any artifacts should you need to move them or animate them. Continuing on, we have another set of pre-built shapes with multi-sided objects. So you've got our pentagon, hexagon, and octagon. And of course they're all scalable, how you would control them. They're absolute sides. They're regular pentagons, octagons, so they all have the same size, same angles, what you'd expect. The next set of controls I'd like to highlight are the various arrow controls that we offer. And of course, you'll note that, I mean, these all default to about 50 by 50 pixels. You can change that, of course. You can make them as small as necessary. They all scale. All of them have direction references, so we can change them all to go to the right. These can be down and so forth. All of the same properties, alignment, strokes, and so forth, let you do that. I guess speaking of some of the other properties I didn't mention, in Showcase is the ability to change, say, the size, and then go in and change the different options. And these are just referencing the standard FMX properties, but we just provide a very quick and easy way to get at those details. All right, so lots of arrow controls and different symbols that we can use. We have a number of pre-built symbols that are very common in our applications for providing checkboxes or X's, pluses for expansion, minuses for collapsion. All of these different pieces can be used, and we'll show some examples of that. They all have a bar size, which allows us to control what their aspect ratio is as they get resized. In the first example I'll show in just a minute, or pre-built example, will leverage that exact ability. And then next up we have what I would more or less term as the fun controls. We've got a marker, we have a little tag control, a banner are ones that we can start with. And of course these are all scalable. The markers, obviously you would do things for for mapping or any type of highlighting. Of course you can change whether the hole is visible or not. The hole size itself is a radiant dimension, so we can scale that appropriately. Of course you can change the direction if it makes sense, so we can change all of those. I have an example where I use it as a slider, for example. The tag, a good way to just identify a tag of some kind. Of course the hole can be removed if necessary. The banner, like for bookmarks, this is a common symbol that you'll see used. We can also change the end style to be just a chevron, so it's a pointer, and this might be just a little target, a little indicator of some sort, changing the direction to the right, for example, and making it small. You could use this to do a selected item and so forth. One of our fun ones, controls, is the star. And it's a regular star by default, and so we can go ahead and pick the various points that we want. If we want it to be a 6-pointed star, we can even make it a 9-pointed star. You can go as any number of points on the star as you would like. We just have it default up to 20. Typically you don't need to have many more than that. But if you were to go, if we wanted this to be more sharper, you can change the inner radius scale factor. And right now it's 1, which represents the ideal to be a regular star, which value that would be. Well, we want it to be a little bit smaller than that to give it a sharpness, and that way we can change this. Likewise, if we go and make the point size, say 15, and we can get a little starburst value to get a really nice look on the star there. And of course you could fill this in with a gradient and all kinds of coloring options as you would need. The gear is very similar to that. The gear is a good indicator for configuration, but we can use it for other indicators. You can of course change the cogs on it, and of course the cog size is a radiant dimension, so we can make those smaller or even larger should you want. And we can of course change the hole size. We can make that really tiny, and you have a whole different kind of gear. And of course, because of the scaling and everything, as you change it, it will adjust its size appropriately, which is really powerful and nice. And then one of our last controls here is a shield, and we typically associate this with any kind of security or authorization, and we have a pre-built number of shield styles that are built in, anywhere from pointed to concave. We go through curved. As you can see, we have quite a bit of fun in the various shield styles, going medieval, going to just a simple rounded, very Windows-ish like shield, and then some fancy ones like a badge. and go into even an interstate. Again, some more mapping concepts here, and even a route symbol gives us some flexible shapes that we can leverage. So this gives us the quick overview of what's in the library. What I do want to cover next, though, is what can we do with these shapes? How do we really enhance our applications when we have radiant shapes in our toolbox? And that's what we'll cover next. So here I have loaded a new project group called Radiant Shapes Demos. This comes with the product. So these are all pre-built demos that illustrate the various capabilities of the library. And this first example is a very simple tic-tac-toe game, but it does leverage several different features that I mentioned in the overview. Specifically, I'm using the Radiant X and the Radiant Ring for the various cells. I'm using some radiant rectangles for the designer surface. I'm using some nice abilities. There's some alpha channeling that's going on through all of this. All this is set up at design time that I can change. I'm using some shared resources to color them so that I can color all of the different shapes as necessary. So let's go ahead and run this, and we'll see exactly what it does. So here we have the application running, and it's using one of the pre-built styles that come with FMX. However, that's only giving us the button style and the background. The rest of this is coming from Radiant Shapes. So I'm using the X for the various X states, and I'm using the ring for the O states, and I can continue on with my game as appropriate. What's nice, though, is as I resize, the X's and the O's maintain their aspect. This isn't images. They're not bitmap images or even PNG images to allow this to happen. And the reason for that is we don't want to lose the integrity or the fidelity of the shapes as we go to a larger resolution. So if we're running on a Windows machine and we have a traditional 96 or even 72 DPI monitor, we can get nice clean imaging. If we run with a Retina display on an iOS device or even a high-res device on an Android device, we want to be able to get that richness, but we're dealing with a much higher DPI. And if you try to just simply stretch your PNG images, you're going to get artifacts and it won't be as clean. Of course, the option for that is providing another set for the various settings that you use, but sometimes that can be actually counterproductive because you're only going to be using one of those image sets in your deployed target. And so this gives us a way to leverage a lot of that all within the control. And one of the things that you'll note that I didn't mention before is that the stroke size changes as the size of the window changes as well. And that's because with Radiant Shapes we can scale the stroke size. So there's a scale stroke size property as well that you can get from the component menu. What's also nice is as I resize this, I'll make this a little bit bigger, and go ahead and have my X is going to win this one. Oh, I guess I can make O win. I'm dynamically changing the coloring that's used for the shape. So rather than provide multiple images, I can change this. If I want to tweak them, I simply change the fill and the stroke properties to get the desired effect that I want. So it's a lot of flexibility in all of that. Of course, we can do a new game and start it all over. So that scaling of the stroke size, if you pull up the stroke option, there's a scaled setting, and so we've got that turned on so that as I resize it, the stroke size will adjust appropriately. Now that scaling only takes place at runtime. So even if you turn it on, you can reposition everything at design time the way you want it to start with. Then when the application's running, it will adjust appropriately. So let's move on to the next example. And this is utilizing several of the other shape controls to demonstrate a flowchart. Now, would we design a flowchart in this manner, precisely like this? Probably not, but if you imagine a process monitoring system, so you want to highlight the flow of your system, in which state different activities are being monitored in, here's an example where you could do that. This also does allow us to leverage several of the shapes and talk about the ability to embed text inside of them and align them to the contents of the text. Our arrows are being used to highlight this. So let's give this a quick little run. And of course I've got them color coded, and what's nice with all of this is using the built-in alignment for FMX. We can align to scale so that as we've laid this out and we adjust it, it will update everything appropriately. So by setting these things up, we get a lot of flexibility in creating our UI. And of course the word wrapping and all of that takes place and how we set that up. So a nice little fun example. The playlist, let's move on to that one next. This is a modified version of a sample that I talk about in my effectively using list controls on mobile devices presentation, also here at CodeRage. In this example though, what I really wanted was to use our star. And so this is our song list, and if I go ahead and run this, this will be the easiest way. Is I wanted to use stars to highlight the different ratings. And so rather than just simple circles or bitmaps, I wanted to be able to change this. And so I can simply click on these and record the rating and change them, adjust them, and so forth. If you're looking to understand how I did this, I used the same technique about creating the embedded list item. And then I just use radiant stars for each of the elements, and the detail on my other session goes into the mechanics of this. But what's nice is that because it's a list view, you get the fast speed, the lightweight nature of all the shapes, and if I were to run this on another device with a higher DPI, I can simply change the scaling of the item size for those, and the shapes will adjust automatically for us. So you get a nice rich, crisp interface regardless of your target. So that's our playlist. If we now move to the media player, media player is an interesting example. We leverage the media player component that's built into FMX, but we also wanted the ability to kind of stylize the interface a little bit. So we leverage a style book to give us the black background and the standard panel colors, but we didn't want to use standard buttons. We wanted to use the shapes themselves. And so what this application does is all of the elements that you can click on and manipulate are all shape controls. And many of them are composites. So this is 2 chevrons for the fast forward and the rewind. We've got the sector ring for changing the volume setting. We have the same we have a marker that's used for the progress in the track bar. So these are actually, we've modified the style for the track bar to use a radiant shape as the indicator. So wherever, because these are regular FMX shape controls, wherever you can use them normally for all your embedded styles and other techniques, you can use radiant shapes instead. This one is using just a rectangle and a triangle, ring and another rectangle, and so forth. Here we're using an arrow and a rectangle to give us. But this isn't the whole reason why we wanted to do it. It's not just the compositing. It's the runtime behavior that we wanted to change. So let's go ahead and run this application and see what we get. So as you can see, when we run the application, we've colored each of the different shapes, this blue color, with a glow effect as we move the mouse over it, including the track bar thumbs that are using the shapes as well. And of course I can go in and click the open button, select a little video, and we can go ahead and play this, and it will play it. We can control the volume as necessary. We can pause it, change to a new position, start the playback up, and it will adjust appropriately. What's also really nice, the reason why I used shape controls here and not just regular images, is that I wanted to be able to change them. So I've set up a couple pre-canned ones, like I can make it a green color, click OK, and all of my theming and coloring has changed to the green coloring, including the glow effects as well. But even more than that, I can even customize that. Because these are just shapes, you have complete control over what you want that to do. So if I wanted to, say, make an orange style, I can simply change the orange color in the highlight and accept that, and now I've changed and modified the different settings that I have. So nice little utility capabilities for using the radiant shapes. So the next example really captures the composite nature of radiant shapes and the ability to use multiple shape controls to provide extra UI capabilities. And in this example, I have 4 different examples of gauges. It's a common technique certainly for dashboard applications, system monitoring applications, and so forth. And for the most part, gauges are used to represent various pieces of data, and it's nice people recognize the digital, the rounded gauges. That's what a lot of our automobiles are set up as, and being able to manipulate that is very powerful. Now, if we take a look at one of these gauges, what we'll see is that it's actually just a composite. For example, we have a circle that's used for the middle there. We have a trapezoid that's being used for the needle. We have another sector frame that provides the black outline around the whole thing, with 3 other sectors representing the color sections without any stroke settings inside of the control. And they're all housed into a layout gauge so that if I were to resize it and stretch it, they all maintain their perspective. So it's very easy to change. Likewise, because of the rotation capabilities of FMX, we leverage that inside of the manipulation for all of these needle controls. So let me go ahead and give this a quick run, and we can see the benefit of this. So here's our gauges, and I'm using the track bar to make the change between the different highs and low values for this particular gauge. Likewise, I can do it for this value, and it's nice that we get a nice smooth transition between it. It's another nice thing. We're not having to do any extra manipulation. The shape takes care of all of that for us. If we look at the event handlers for these, we'll see we're just changing the angle of the particular needle or the trapezoid appropriately. This one is using a marker without the hole to represent changing the volumes. Even these are sector rings set up at different angle values to present what we need. Gives us a lot of flexibility. What's really nice is if you can go in and you have all the full support for animation, and you might get a little bit of choppiness because of the streaming nature of this, but the effect is very powerful to where we can dynamically change the values of our gauges and provide a very rich UI to our users. So that's the gauges control. Next up on our example list is a what I like to call a dashboard. And this can be a variety of different techniques. In this example, this is more of a kind of a system process or state management, if you will, that how is a system running and how active it is, what type of communication channels are going on, and it's a logical representation of a network of various interconnected nodes. So we have a server piece here with some various what I would call controllers, A, B, and C. Each of those are connected to some sort of dispensers, which is where the out of paper comes in. So perhaps a kiosk-like system that's running distributed in an environment, we want to be able to monitor that and then have some indicators that represent what it is we're seeing, the current state, and if something goes wrong, what's actually happening. And all of these elements are all the shapes, including the little rectangle on the outside, the header bars. Of course, the text is part of the t-text basic shape class that's included in FMX. So let's give a run and see what this gives us. Let me center this up a little bit. And what we have down at the bottom here is a simulate checkbox, again made with some of the shapes here. And this is going to simulate network activity and how we could visualize that using these shapes. And so here we're using just changing the fill state, and now we've run into an error condition. We're using the radiant call out to emphasize what is actually going on. We're highlighting the error. This is various controls that we have. Go ahead and turn that back on, and we can manipulate and do some more work. And seeing the monitoring of this. Again, another out of paper. kind of the same kind of things. Should be a little randomness here, but again, we're simulating. The key is to showcase the various controls that we have. We lost a response for dispenser number 2 here, and so I can go ahead and turn this off and go back to our idle state to see what's going on. So a fun little example to hopefully give you some ideas of just how we can leverage radiant shapes in our applications. And just to wrap it up, a fun little example at the end here is I'm using the gears. I use them for configuration. Of course, when you see a gear, you kind of have to have it rotate. And so I made up a final little application here that will animate all the gears and show the inner workings of the power that radiant shapes give us. It's something fun, but it does capture a lot of the details of what's available in this library. So that provided an overview of radiant shapes, provided a little bit more detail to some of the capabilities that are available and what we can do with them. Just to recap some of the concepts and items I mentioned before, the supported development environments, we support Rad Studio, XE6 and XE7. We also support App Method 1.14 and 1.15. So we are pretty modern. We're utilizing the latest enhancements to FMX. So we're following all the new conventions as the framework has evolved over time. We are leveraging that same thing. So rather than worry about older versions, we want to make sure that we're supporting the current and future versions as best we can. With that said, we also support all of the different targets that are supported by FMX. So that includes Windows, Mac OS X, iOS devices in the simulator, including all the Android devices as well. So whatever target you want to hit, Radiant Shapes will be there for you. Radiant Shapes pricing is a bit different than traditional Raize Software products, which were more single-use, purchase at once, purchase maybe upgrades as new versions came out. In order for us to be more effective in handling changes to the FMX framework and the dual release cycle that is occurring with Embarcadero these days with the various versions of Rad Studio and App Method, we are switching to a subscription model for Radiant Shapes. The subscription model gives any customer all updates and new versions for as long as their subscription is active. And so that's the best way to stay on top with the current versions. And as you move forward in your IDEs, you know that Radiant Shapes will be there for you for that. We also provide free support via email and web forums for active subscriptions. So again, we certainly want you guys to be the most effective that you can. We put a lot of effort into the quality of the shapes because they're such a fundamental piece. We want them to be rock solid. But should you have a question on how to use them and even enhancement requests and new shapes that you would like to see added in, we're always willing to take your feedback and look at extending the product moving forward. The best news, though, is we really want to make this affordable and available to all FMX developers. The subscription is just $49. We think this is a great value for what you're getting for the dual release cycles, for getting updated extensions on the product. As we move forward, we can add in more and more shapes as people request, and we've got already ideas for new things that are coming. Really want this to be part of every developer's toolbox out there. To order, we are going to start taking orders this week. You can go to raize.com/devtools/ordering, and they'll have details on there on how to do that. And so we hope that you will find this compelling and want to add this to your toolbox. We also have several other products. We've been supporting Embarcadero products, Rad Studio, Delphi C++ Builder for many, many years. We are coming up on our 20th anniversary, just like Delphi is itself. And so our other products are available still. We still continue to support those. And we do have some special discounts for those products for CodeRage attendees as well. You can find more information at the CodeRage 9 web page that's referenced here. And of course, remember the CodeRage 9 promotion code that will give you the extra discounts for the other products that we have. So if you're looking to upgrade or doing both dual VCL and FMX development, get Raize components and Radiant shapes, and you'll be good to go. So that is all the information that I have. I hope you found it interesting and informative. I do thank you for taking the time to listen to me describe this brand new product of ours. We're very excited about it. We think it adds a lot of value to the FMX product line and capabilities of components that are in the box. And I will be standing by during the live Q&A portion if you have any questions. And of course, for more information, you can go to our Dev Tools section on Radiant Shapes and find more information there. And of course, you can contact me in the various methods that are listed on the screen. Thank you once again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
They look really exciting and cool to work with.
It's been, as everybody knows, it's been a long time coming, and one of the common questions we ask, when are you going to come out with a package? What are you going to do for FireMonkey? And we knew long ago that we wanted to support it, but what we didn't want to do was just do a port of things that people, might use or might not use. We really wanted to find some area where we could really leverage the UI capabilities and really be cognizant of the multi-device nature that development is taking these days. So we're not just running on our desktops anymore. We're not even just running on our phones. We've got tablets. We've got, associated applications. You're connecting to different things. And what we really found was there's a lot of visualizations that we'd love to be able to do that are just, they're hard. You either have to do custom paths, and then there's a lot of work to get those to work correctly when you start scaling and changing, point sizes for the strokes and all of that stuff. And so that's why, it took us a little bit of time, but we're very pleased with the way the library turned out and all the designer features. I hope it didn't go unnoticed that during the presentation, I didn't use the object inspector once. That is by design. That's one of the strengths that we've carried over from the Raize Components product is the design time interface and making sure that we leverage that as best we can.
Yeah, that always appreciated that with your components. All right, so we got some questions queued up here. First one is, with the subscription model, what happens when the subscription expires?
Oh, it's a great question. As many people know, same thing with Embarcadero yourselves is switching over to a subscription does allow us to leverage the dual release cycle better, ensure that we can provide timely updates and all of that. There's no cutoff. If you let your subscription lapse, it does not turn off your code. However, you won't be eligible to get any future updates that are released or new versions that are released until you reestablish your subscription. So ideally, we want the motivation for going to the subscription model is also very strongly driven by the changes that have been made over the years in FMX since its initial release. In order for us to continue to support the latest changes that are made, we can't go back and support older versions as readily as you could with the VCL. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. You start if-defing your code like crazy when you do that. Even going from XE7 to XE6 or app method 1.15 and 1.14, there's subtle changes between the two of those. Add in XE5 into the mix and it's even worse.
Right.
So we really want to make it easy for people to move forward. But if you do stop and you don't continue your subscriptions with Rad Studio and you just are comfortable with that version, you can continue to use Radiant Shapes in that way. Hi.
Sorry, I just was trying to find the slide on the video again. Okay, great. Speaking of subscriptions, is there a way that someone could buy multi-year subscriptions so they can just go ahead and decide they want to do it now and get them all bought at once?
Sure, we'd be happy to work with our customers if they were interested in something like that. I would recommend them send an email to sales@raize.com and talk to us about us, and I'm sure we can set something up for you.
Excellent, great. There's the question. Let's see, the next question is, are the radiant shapes for 2D forms only, or could they also be adopted to 3D?
They are designed as they're T-shape descendants, so they do get their basic behavior from the HD T-shape base class. If you were to use them inside of a layout 3D, you could certainly embed them in, but they're not designed as a 3D shape.
Okay, so it would be, if you did use them in, it would still be a 2D shape on, or be a 2D shape on a 3D canvas, essentially.
Correct.
Okay. Is it possible to use these components to write text folded along a circle or a segment of a circle?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I like where he's thinking. We've had some similar thoughts in mind. It does not support that right now in the sense that it really needs to be the text object that does that. Like the text knows how to display itself along a path. So not supported yet, but that's clearly something. We didn't release a text component with Radiant Shapes in this first initial version. We had some ideas of what we wanted to do with that, but it wasn't ready for prime time. But being able to go along a path is certainly something we can certainly look at doing in the future.
Great, that sounds exciting. Having an old app in VCL that I hope to be able to modernize, could a program contain forms both made in VCL mixed with other forms made with FireMonkey? So actually Marco mentioned this came up yesterday, and Marco said that are workarounds to do this, but that you end up with weird situations sometimes with 2 message loops and stuff like that. So
you can, it's if they're in the same app, there's some challenges with that. There's some extra tools and things out there that can help you do some things like that. Hosting like plugins is another way of kind of getting around that, where you have your host application, but then you can load up the design surface from another. And it's technically possible. It just has some technical challenges to go along and do that.
A lot of comments. These look great. Just ordered it. So excited.
Thank you. That's awesome.
In the gauges demo, the third gauge from the left seems to have a bitmap background. Is that correct?
Yes. As a shape, the fill property that is defined in FMX, we get all the capabilities of that, and that includes solid fills, gradient fills, bitmap fills. And so actually the 2 gauges in that demo, the far left one and the third from the left, both use a bitmap fill. One is providing the metallic faceplate, and then the other is providing a textured background for the dial face.
Very cool. Very impressive. I really like the banner with the chevron end. How would I put this as a thumb button on a thumb tracker?
If all the demo applications that I showed come with the product, and the media player demo actually has 2 track bars where I replace the style for the thumb, the default thumb that's used, with one of the Radiant shapes. In one example, it uses the sector ring, and the other one it uses the marker. If you were to look at that and do the same with the banner control, you could certainly do that. Sure, they're just components. So if you wanted to create a descendant of one of ours, you could certainly do that. I mean, that's essentially how, you know, all this started. Was there's a base class, there's a T radiant shape base class that gives us our default capabilities, what we want it to have in there, and then from there, everything else descends from it. And there's some other intermediate classes that make the facilitate things much easier as well.
Excellent.
For example, there's a T radiant path shape. So any of the shapes that require a path to define what they look like, we have a base class that gives us functionality for that.
And so
we plan on extending. I'm sorry to jump back in, but we plan on extending the shapes, you know, to keep adding more and more shapes as we build the library.
And does the subscription include source code for people that want to get in there and extend things?
Yes, it does.
Oh, I love that. Actually, you know what? A long time ago, I was doing some work and was using your components and ended up learning so much about colors and stuff just from going through your source code on your old VCO components, because I was fairly new to the whole color scheme, and you had some great stuff in there. So that is
thank you.
Exciting. Subscription service is the only way to go. Just bought the shapes total no brainer, and the first time I've bought a component on the first site at CodeRage. Great demo. Oh, great.
Awesome. Thank you. We certainly appreciate it. It's a great community event, and we're just happy to, you know, we're really excited to be able to show this and get the feedback from customers. It's awesome.
Yeah, there's a lot of either just bought it, buying it tomorrow, going to buy it. Always known as Windows render says okay. Suggestion: create a demo that replaces the FMX native DB navigator with Radiant Shape DB navigation.
Absolutely.
That would be cool. Your IDE showed a Raize panels component group. Is this a future component set? By the way, shapes look great.
Thank you. The Raize panel was the Raize component palette. And so there's a couple non-visual components that are part of that. And when you're on an FMX form, non-visual components will show up. So that's why they showed up there.
This feels odd to say. They're non-visual. That's why they showed up.
Yes.
Can you clip one shape with another? For example, a grid of hexagons inside a layout clipped by a star shape.
Yes, you should be able to do that, because because all the regular ownership capabilities and containership would still apply, and then you'd have to tweak the clip children property for the outer control. That should work. I haven't tried it, but I think that would work.
Okay, that sounds really cool.
Now, and then I should also add, I don't know if I mentioned it in there, but all the hit testing, at runtime, the hit testing is connected to the shape itself. So if it's a star, for example, the hit test will only register if you're on the star, not the gaps between the points. But at design time, the hit testing works for the regular bounds, so it's easier to manipulate and move around on the designer surface.
Okay.
So you can have overlapping shapes and have different click events on each one, and whatever one you click on, that will be the one that registers, even if it's behind the other ones.
So the base classes are exposed for reuse?
Yep.
What? Caesar's already brainstorming things to do with these.
That's what we want.
So Walter wants to know if you're planning to port your regular VCL library to FireMonkey as well.
Probably not the whole thing, just because there's a lot of features inside of there that were specifically driven to handle the UI deficiencies that Windows and the regular common controls, didn't provide. But a lot of those things go away when you're talking about FMX controls. And then you add into the mix certain functionality pieces that, like we have a daytime edit. control, which works really well for our VCL desktop applications. Building one for the mobile space is a little bit more tricky in the sense that it's unlikely you would actually want to replace the one that comes with the device itself, unless you made it exactly the same. And then if you're going to do that, what's the purpose for it? So there's certain controls that clearly would make sense to bring over. And if there's specific ones in mind that Walter's interested in, feel free to contact me and let me know what you're interested in doing with them.
Any plans to show bounds grab handles at runtime? I guess we could do that ourselves with more shapes. Certainly best for composite shapes. But what is the memory footprint like?
Several questions in that.
Yeah. So I guess bounds handles at runtime first.
We don't have any plans to do that, at least not right initially. I suppose but then you would probably want to extend that beyond just shapes and have it for any control. Certainly a viable solution. I don't know if you would really leverage that on the mobile side, more of a desktop feature. Mm-hmm. And then what was the secondary question?
What does the memory footprint look like on composite shapes?
Oh, well, they're very lightweight in the sense that they're just shapes. So there's no style associated with them. So there's no resource usage. It's just all self-contained little classes.
All right, I think the rest of these questions are just people saying, oh, wait, here's one that says Windows Defender claims that your demo is infected. So apparently it's mismatched. That happens sometimes.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, I think everybody else is just saying, I'm excited, already bought it, gonna buy it. Yeah,
awesome.
Excellent. Thank you, Ray. This is exciting.
You're very welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to showcase this, and this is the launch. This is the first time anybody's seen the product, so this was the launch day. So
here's
welcome to CodeRage 9.
Yeah, this is great. Someone's asking again. Source code, yes, it is included for buying it. Ray mentioned that earlier. Now here's will TIX Object Inspector be ported to FireMonkey?
Stay tuned.
Great. All right. Thanks so much, Ray.
Thank you.
Bye.